Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are immersing ourselves in, well, what has to be one of the most consequential documents of the new year. We're looking at the strategic priorities coming directly out of Beijing.
That's right. And our sources are all centered on that annual New Year's Eve address, the one delivered by President Xi Jinping on Wednesday, December 31st, 2025.
But crucially, and this is the key, we're not just looking at the speech in isolation. We have to contextualize it with the massive, and I mean massive, military and diplomatic actions that came right before and right after it.
And this is a document that, it just demands deep scrutiny. This isn't just polite holiday rhetoric.
No.
It is a meticulously crafted statement of intent for any government, any corporation, or really just any curious observer who's trying to plot the trajectory of China's behavior in 2026.
Which is, let's be honest, pretty much everyone.
Everyone, whether it's militarily, economically, or diplomatically. The core signals are embedded right here. We really have to strip away the celebratory language and look directly at the hard policy dictates.
And at the force projection that gave them all that weight.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So our mission today, for you, is to quickly and thoroughly extract the most significant strategic, military, and diplomatic threads woven through this message.
Because these threads, taken together, they really define the actions and aspirations of a global superpower for the entire coming year.
And we have to start right where the tension is highest. The timing of this address was, well, it was no accident, was it?
Not in the slightest.
It was delivered the day after these intense, just enormous military drills near Taiwan. It is functionally impossible to separate the political rhetoric of the New Year's vow from the spectacle of that massive force projection.
That combination is the immediate, essential lens through which we have to view this deep dive. You have this foundational diplomatic signal, a New Year's promise to the nation, and it's backed up immediately by the undeniable threat of overwhelming force.
So what does that tell you right off the bat?
It tells you that Beijing's priorities have crystallized. Taiwan remains the absolute flashpoint. And every other policy, whether it's economic innovation or, diplomatic alignment, is really in service of this core geopolitical objective.
So let's jump straight into that central vow, the one that anchors the entire strategic message. The language here is so carefully selected, it leaves zero room for ambiguity.
None.
Xi Jinping placed this claim right at the top of the strategic priorities, stating, and I'm quoting here, "The reunification of our motherland, a trend of the times, is unstoppable." Unstoppable.
Yeah.
That one word is doing some incredibly heavy lifting.
It really is. It's not a negotiation tactic. It's not an opening bid. It is a definitive statement of historical and political inevitability. It's framed as a national mandate that just cannot be deflected.
What's the significance of that phrasing, a trend of the times? It sounds almost philosophical.
Well, it's highly significant because of the intellectual and historical tradition he is trying to invoke. By labeling reunification a trend of the times, he's attempting to establish the desired outcome annexation, not as a political goal that, might be negotiated or avoided.
Right, not something you can talk your way out of.
Exactly. He's framing it as a force of historical destiny, something beyond the petty disagreements of the present moment. In that rhetorical move, it elevates the claim beyond current political squabbles and anchors it deep within the CCP's core pillar of legitimacy.
Which is all about correcting historical humiliation.
It's all about correcting the so-called century of humiliation. For the Chinese Communist Party, national rejuvenation is simply incomplete without absorbing Taiwan. It's the final piece of the puzzle.
And China claims Taiwan, of course, is part of its territory.
Yeah.
They've long vowed to annex it, using force if necessary. But for you, our listener, it is so crucial to remember the context on the ground here. While Beijing presents this as inevitable, the people on the receiving end of this vow, they overwhelmingly and actively disagree.
A profound disagreement.
Our source explicitly notes this is the core of the conflict. The overwhelming majority of Taiwanese people reject the idea of reunification under the one-party rule of the CCP in Beijing.
So this isn't just a boundary dispute. It's not about a line on a map.
No, it's a profound conflict over identity, over self-governance, and really over the fundamental value of democracy versus authoritarianism.
And that rejection, that is what underpins the entire risk matrix. If we want to examine the strategic weight of this mandate, we have to look beyond the rhetoric and acknowledge the physical reality of the situation.
You mean the military buildup?
The military buildup, yes. There is rising concern from U.S. intelligence, specifically regarding the rapid and, frankly, dramatic advancement in the capabilities of China's armed forces, the PLA.
They're not just listening to the words anymore.
No, they are analyzing the material readiness to actually execute the threat. Analysts are increasingly focused on what they call the window of action.
Meaning the point where they have a real chance of success.
Exactly. That moment in time when the PLA's capability to launch a complex, comprehensive attack aligns perfectly with the political environment and, Xi Jinping's perceived need for action.
So when you talk about that window of action shortening, what specific military advancements are driving that assessment? Is it just that they have more ships and more planes? Or is it something more fundamental about how they're learning to fight?
It's absolutely the latter. It's the move toward a genuine joint operations capability and the sophistication of their missile forces.
Okay, what do you mean by joint operations?
Well, for years, the PLA was really hampered by a lack of integrated command structure. The Navy, the Air Force, the ground forces, they all operated in their own silos.
Right, they didn't really talk to each other effectively.
They didn't. But recent large-scale exercises, like the one we're about to discuss, they demonstrate that they are overcoming that barrier. They are practicing multi-domain warfare, which is exactly what you need for an island invasion or, and this is probably more likely, a sustained blockade.
So these advancing capabilities mean the tactical complexity of an operation like that is becoming manageable for Beijing.
It is. And that, in turn, raises the threshold of credible deterrence that the U.S. and Taiwan have to maintain. The goalposts keep moving.
And this military readiness, this unstoppable vow, it's all inextricably linked to China's vast, sustained diplomatic efforts, isn't it?
Completely.
It's not just about what they can do to Taiwan militarily, it's about what the rest of the world says about it. Central to Xi's vision of a new world order isn't just the annexation of Taiwan.
No.
It's securing the support of other countries, especially in the global south, key trading partners formally recognizing Taiwan as part of one China.
This is the global pressure track, and it runs 204 to 7. The One China principle isn't just a political talking point for Beijing. It's the universal litmus test they use to measure loyalty or, antagonism on the global stage.
So every time a country reaffirms that principle, it's a win for Beijing.
It's a huge win. It serves multiple strategic purposes. First, it legitimizes Beijing's claim both at home and internationally. Second, and this is perhaps more important, it further isolates Taipei on the global stage. It strips them of vital diplomatic oxygen.
It's sort of an incremental strategy then, designed to make the final act of annexation, should it ever happen, an internationally recognized fait accompli.
A done deal.
A done deal that provokes minimal resistance, or at least resistance that could be easily dismissed as just, the reaction of a few hostile Western powers.
Precisely. They are using diplomacy to reduce the cost of future military action by making it harder for Taiwan to maintain observer status in international organizations like the World Health Organization.
Which we've seen happen.
We have. And by poaching diplomatic allies in the Pacific and Latin America, and by pressuring multinational corporations to list Taiwan as a province of China, Beijing is systematically dismantling the very idea of Taiwan as an independent political entity.
So the goal is to make the political isolation so complete that military action, if it's deemed necessary, looks like just the final phase of a long-accepted historical process.
That is the playbook.
So the New Year's vow lands with this double punch: historical inevitability at home and intensified diplomatic pressure abroad. And both are backed by the threat of force. That makes the details of the preceding military exercise even more critical. This vow did not happen in a vacuum. The specific details of that military demonstration are a massive strategic signal. And here's where it gets really interesting, because now we're looking at the anatomy of coercion. Right, let's get into the exercise itself. These were intense live-fire drills, and they were given this heavily political name, Justice Mission 2025.
A very loaded name.
And the timing is just absolutely critical. They took place on Monday and Tuesday, immediately preceding the New Year's Eve address on Wednesday.
That deliberate sequencing, it ensures that the strategic message in the speech landed while the world's navies and defense analysts were still processing, still watching the military spectacle unfold.
Let's talk about that name, Justice Mission. What's the signal there?
The naming convention is vital. Justice Mission 2025 frames the exercise not as aggression, which, in the eyes of Taiwan and its allies, it clearly is, but as the fulfillment of a righteous national necessity.
It's a justification.
It's a justification that links directly back to Xi's unstoppable trend rhetoric. It legitimizes the use of force as a corrective historical action, not an invasion, but a restoration.
But more critical than the name, I think, is the simulated action itself. Our source confirms the exercises were specifically designed to simulate a blockade of Taiwan's main ports.
And this is where we need to spend some time, because a blockade is not an invasion, and that difference is a very deliberate strategic choice.
What is that distinction? Why practice a blockade?
Well, it is a profound strategic distinction. An outright invasion, a D-Day style landing on the beaches is catastrophic.
Yeah.
It's unbelievably bloody. It requires massive force concentration. It risks immense human life on both sides.
And it guarantees an immediate, overwhelming international reaction.
Exactly. Condemnation and potentially direct U.S. military intervention. A blockade, however, is a high-stakes, coercive option that sits in that gray zone between peace and all-out war.
How does it work? How does a blockade force capitulation? What would that actually look like on the ground?
A sustained blockade effectively starves the island, not necessarily of food, they have stockpiles, but of economic life and critical resources. Taiwan is a highly developed trade-dependent economy.
Totally reliant on shipping.
Completely. It imports vast quantities of fuel, raw materials, and components that are necessary to maintain its high-tech manufacturing sector, the semiconductor industry.
So by controlling the sea lanes.
By controlling maritime traffic, Beijing can cut off these vital supply lines. This leads to an almost immediate economic collapse, widespread domestic panic, and immense political pressure on the government in Taipei to negotiate favorable terms with Beijing just to lift the blockade.
So it allows for an extended period of coercive diplomacy without the immediate commitment of landing troops.
That's it. It's a sophisticated form of economic warfare executed by the military and the Coast Guard, and it's designed to break the will of the government and the populace before a single soldier even needs to set foot on the island.
That sounds incredibly complex to pull off, which I guess speaks to the force composition you mentioned earlier.
It confirms the complexity, exactly. This
Right.
was not a single-branch exercise. It was a genuine multi-force operation. It involved the Navy, the Air Force, the Rocket Force, and the Coast Guard,
All working together.
all working together to encircle Taiwan's main island. And that indicates an extremely high level of inter-service coordination and readiness for a comprehensive joint operation.
Okay, let's break down the role of each of those elements in a potential blockade scenario. Let's start with the Navy.
The Navy provides the muscle on the water. We're talking destroyers, frigates, and submarines establishing and enforcing the perimeter. They physically prevent ships from entering or leaving major ports like Kaohsiung or Keelung.
And the Air Force.
The Air Force, the PLAF, provides air superiority. They protect the naval assets from any potential counterattack. And they are also tasked with precision strikes against critical shore-based assets, things like radar stations or command centers that could coordinate a response.
Now the Rocket Force. Their involvement signals an entirely different level of capability, doesn't it?
It really does. The Rocket Force, which used to be known as the 2nd Artillery Corps, manages China's entire land-based conventional and nuclear missile inventory.
So in a blockade, we're not talking about nuclear weapons.
No, absolutely not. We're talking about conventional precision strikes. We're talking about missiles like the DF-15 and the DF-16 short to medium-range ballistic missiles.
And what would their targets be?
Their targets would be Taiwan's crucial infrastructure, airfields to ground the Taiwanese Air Force, key port facilities to ensure the blockade is total, and command and control centers. Their involvement demonstrates Beijing's readiness to paralyze the island from a safe distance, making any attempt to break the blockade lethally expensive for Taipei.
Okay, and finally, the involvement of the Coast Guard. Why is this sort of civilian-military hybrid of the Coast Guard so essential to a blockade?
The Coast Guard is critical because they operate in that gray zone most effectively. They can be deployed to intercept civilian or commercial shipping without formally engaging naval vessels.
Which lowers the temperature a bit.
It lowers the perceived threshold for international conflict. A Chinese Coast Guard vessel harassing a foreign freighter is politically less provocative than a Chinese Navy destroyer doing the same thing, yet the effect controlling the shipping is identical.
So their involvement implies control over civilian shipping, which you need for a true blockade, and it offers Beijing plausible deniability.
Or at least deniability that it is a formal act of war rather than simply maritime law enforcement. It's a very subtle but very important legal and political distinction.
Okay, so beyond just the scope of the exercise, our sources point to clear measurable indicators of escalation compared to previous saber-rattling events.
Yes.
The proximity of these drills is noted specifically. They came closer to Taiwan than previous exercises. That physical reduction in distance has to be significant.
It is a tangible metric of rising risk and, I would say, rising confidence on their part. Reduced distance means reaction time for Taiwan's defenses shrinks dramatically. It forces a much higher state of alert.
And it raises the chance of an accident.
It absolutely does. Closer operations inherently raise the probability of an accidental flashpoint, an unintended mid-air collision, or a navigational error that leads to immediate unintended escalation.
But the number that truly jumps out from the source is the aircraft tally. The drills involved at least 89 warplanes.
An incredible number.
That is a truly staggering figure for a non-wartime exercise. And to put that in perspective for you, the source notes this is the highest tally recorded for more than a year.
That is the headline metric of intent. 89 warplanes circling your territory is not minor posturing. That is a sustained, high-intensity demonstration of an immediate operational threat.
It would be incredibly expensive to do.
Immense. It requires huge logistical effort, fuel expenditure, pilot hours. It shows two things. First, that Beijing has the operational capacity to commit this many high-value assets simultaneously. And second, that they have the political willingness to escalate the pressure to a very, very uncomfortable level. This is costly signaling, and it's designed for maximum psychological and strategic effect.
So if the scale is that deliberate, what was the proximate cause? Why this specific exercise with this specific high plane count happened now, right before Xi's address?
Well, the timing is explicit. Chinese state commentators and analysts made the connection completely undeniable. While these drills are now a pretty regular occurrence, the massive scale of Justice Mission 2025 was a direct, calibrated response to a massive recent U.S. action.
And that was?
The approval of a record-breaking $11 billion weapons sale to Taiwan. That's about 8 billion pounds.
A record sale. So that's not just a commercial transaction, that's a strategic determination from Washington.
It's a massive strategic signal. The sheer scale of the U.S. commitment to arming Taiwan is a direct, concrete countersignal to Beijing's reunification vow.
It's in a package that big.
You're looking at things like advanced air defense systems, anti-ship missiles, and critical intelligence gathering assets. Basically, everything necessary for Taiwan to mount a credible defense and complicate any PLA operation. This sale signals a deep strategic determination by the U.S. to ensure Taiwan retains credible self-defense capabilities, regardless of Beijing's escalating threats.
And how does Beijing view that?
Beijing views this as direct and unacceptable interference. A deliberate attempt to undermine the One China principle, which, in their view, demands that the U.S. ceases all military contact with Taipei.
Therefore, Justice Mission 2025 serves as the military riposte. The logic is, you spend $11 billion on defense, we will immediately demonstrate our capacity to overwhelm that defense.
Exactly. We'll do it by deploying our highest number of aircraft in a year and practicing a lethal blockade scenario. It's a very clear, highly visible example of a geopolitical feedback loop. A massive action immediately provokes an equal or perhaps even greater reaction.
And this is really the core takeaway for you, the listener. These two facts, the largest Air Force presence in a year and the direct explicit linkage to that record U.S. arms sale, they provide the clearest possible example of how actions and reactions are escalating in the region.
We are really past the point of distant diplomatic statements. This is a live, real-time calibration of intent being conducted through hardware and force projection.
I think we need to pause on the strategic calculus here, though. Doesn't the U.S. arms sale actually increase the probability of a miscalculation? I mean, the U.S. is trying to deter aggression, but Beijing clearly sees it as a provocation.
It creates a classic security dilemma. It's a perfect example. The U.S. wants to raise the cost of an invasion to make it too painful to contemplate. But Beijing interprets the arms sales as a sign that the U.S. is actively pushing Taiwan toward formal independence, which for Beijing is an absolute red line.
So they respond by demonstrating their immediate, overwhelming capability to negate those newly supplied defenses.
Precisely. The scale of the drills reflects the scale of the U.S. arms package. It's a military dialogue being conducted through fighter jet sorties and simulated blockades, and the stakes are just getting higher with every single interaction.
It also confirms that Beijing is willing to pay the political cost of delivering its most provocative political statement, the New Year's vow, on the heels of its most aggressive military exercise in over a year. That speaks not just to confidence, but maybe to a genuine, rising sense of urgency.
An urgency perhaps driven by the domestic political calendar and, Xi's own legacy.
Okay, now let's pivot from the immediate military coercion to the broader diplomatic strategy, because the message in the New Year's address was deliberately complex.
Very complex.
Amidst this intense military activity and this incredibly aggressive posture toward Taiwan, Xi Jinping stated that China simultaneously embraced the world with open arms.
A jarring
It
juxtaposition.
really is. How do those two things coexist?
It's classic dual messaging, and it's designed for different audiences. The message to the immediate neighborhood, to Taiwan, to Japan, to the Philippines, is conveyed through the warplanes. We are ready, and our claims are non-negotiable.
But the other message,
The other message to the vast majority of the global south and to crucial trading partners in Europe is, we are responsible stakeholders, we are open for business, and we host major multilateral gatherings.
so that embrace the world line was strategically supported by highlighting several major conferences that Beijing hosted during the year.
Yes. This is fundamentally about building institutional legitimacy. It's about demonstrating China's gravitational pull outside of the established Western-led frameworks like the G7 or NATO.
And the key event mentioned in our source was the Shanghai Cooperation Summit, the SCO, back in August. It was held in Tianjin, which is near Beijing.
And when you host a high-profile multilateral event like that, you are physically showcasing your diplomatic pull.
And the power of that pull is measured by who shows up.
It's all about who's in the room. The source specifically mentions the high-profile attendance of world leaders, notably Russia's Vladimir Putin, India's Narendra Modi, and Turkey's Recep Tayyip Erdogan.
That's a very interesting group of leaders.
The presence of those three specific leaders at an SCO summit hosted by China is immensely significant. They represent vastly different but strategically critical poles of global power.
Okay, let's look at the strategic value of each. What does Putin's presence signal beyond the obvious partnership?
Well, Putin's presence reaffirms that growing Sino-Russian strategic alignment, the one often termed a no-limits partnership. Right. It signals a united front on geopolitical issues that challenge the U.S. For China, having Russia as a reliable partner in the UN Security Council and as a vast supplier of energy, it allows Beijing to feel secure on its long northern border while it focuses its primary strategic energy on the Pacific.
And what about Modi, the leader of the world's largest democracy, especially given India's very complicated, often tense border relationship with China?
Modi's attendance is a testament to the complex reality of multipolarity. Despite deep border tensions, like those in the Himalayas, India recognizes the necessity of engaging with a major regional power.
So for China, Modi being there is a huge win.
It's a tremendous win. It lends weight to the SCO as a legitimate non-Western forum. It signals that even direct competitors see the value in China-led multilateralism, and that undermines the U.S. narrative that the world is uniting against Beijing.
And then there's Erdogan, the leader of Turkey, a NATO member. That's a fascinating inclusion.
Erdogan is a pivotal swing state leader. Turkey is a NATO member, yes, but it frequently charts its own independent foreign policy course. It maintains strong ties with both Moscow and Beijing.
So his presence sends a message to the West.
It signals to the West that NATO solidarity is not guaranteed, that influential members are willing to prioritize relationships with China, especially when it comes to their economic and security interests. Their combined presence, Putin, Modi, Erdogan, is a powerful demonstration that the world stage is not a monolith.
And that China is effectively creating viable alternatives to U.S. and European platforms.
Exactly. This diplomatic outreach, however, was fundamentally juxtaposed with pure military spectacle. The broadcast of Xi's speech on Chinese state media was interspersed with these carefully selected shots of China's largest ever military parade,
which was held in September to mark 80 years since the end of World War II.
So the state media wasn't just covering the speech, they were weaving in a powerful visual narrative designed to reinforce national strength and historical destiny. It transformed the New Year's address into this highly produced piece of geopolitical theater.
And the source described that parade as an unbridled display of military force.
A phrase that perfectly captures the state's messaging. But the truly critical geopolitical moment wasn't the tanks and missiles on display, it was the specific alignment of leaders standing side by side during that September parade.
And those leaders were
Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un. That visual alignment is what grabbed global headlines.
And that alignment led to the explicit labeling of this bloc by observers as the axis of upheaval. We need to dedicate some time here. Why that specific term, and what are the implications for the existing global order?
The term axis of upheaval is deliberately confrontational. It's meant to echo the axis of evil language of the past. It reflects the perceived shared mission of these three nations.
So why is it used?
It's used because this grouping, China, Russia, and North Korea, is viewed by Western analysts as fundamentally challenging the U.S.-led post-WWII international system, a system which emphasizes certain principles: respect for established national borders, democratic values, and free market integration under international law.
How exactly does this grouping challenge that system beyond just having massive military parades?
Their challenge operates on multiple domains. First, you have territorial revisionism. Russia's aggression in Ukraine and China's stance on Taiwan are core challenges to the post-1945 norm that you don't change borders by force.
Okay, what else?
Second, there's the economic challenge. China is leading the push for de-dollarization and the creation of alternative global financial architecture, which would diminish the economic leverage of the West. And third, there's cyber and information warfare. This axis is frequently cited as the source of state-sponsored cyber intrusions and disinformation campaigns aimed at undermining democratic institutions all over the world.
So their shared effect is to destabilize and rearrange the current global distribution of power.
Precisely. When you see the leaders of these three nations standing together, it visually represents a unified, if, loosely coordinated front against what they perceive as Western hegemony and interventionism.
It suggests shared interest in minimizing U.S. global influence.
It does. And the implication of the term upheaval is that this axis isn't seeking mere compromise within the existing system. They are collectively working toward a fundamental systemic change, a rearrangement of global governance itself.
I have to push back on this alignment, though. Doesn't that image of alignment, especially with North Korea and a belligerent Russia, risk alienating crucial trade partners in Europe and Southeast Asia? Is the cost of this geopolitical signaling worth the diplomatic damage to Beijing's efforts to appear responsible?
And that is the essential paradox of China's foreign policy today. It highlights the internal tension between their strategic ambition and their need for economic stability.
So how do they manage that?
Well, Beijing attempts to manage this risk by distinguishing between political alignment and economic engagement. They offer European nations a vast trade relationship, effectively saying, we can be your largest market regardless of our political friendships.
But as you said, the axis of upheaval label does impose a cost.
It does. It solidifies the Western perception of China as a strategic competitor. It accelerates efforts in Europe and North America toward de-risking or decoupling supply chains, which is certainly detrimental to China's long-term economic interests. It forces allies to choose sides.
And right now, the signal from Beijing suggests they prioritize strategic alignment over avoiding that diplomatic friction.
It certainly seems that way.
This brings us to a fascinating and escalating rhetorical battleground: history. China is actively leveraging the legacy of World War II to reinforce its narrative.
Both at home and abroad.
Xi's address and the accompanying military parade, they emphasized China's role in defeating the Japanese in WWII, a role it explicitly feels has been underappreciated in the West.
This narrative serves a critical dual purpose. Domestically, it reinforces Beijing's legitimacy by positioning the CCP as the rightful heir to the nation's historical struggle and triumph over imperialism.
And internationally.
Internationally, it attempts to deflect contemporary criticism about its current aggressive posture by framing itself as a historical victim and victor that is simply reclaiming its rightful place in the regional order. It links modern geopolitical goals directly to a narrative of national sacrifice and triumph.
So the logic is, if China was the key victor against imperialism in Asia, then its contemporary regional leadership, including its claims over Taiwan, is framed as a natural and moral continuation of that historical mission.
Precisely.
But the deep rhetorical divide is highlighted by the fact that the legacy of WWII was a major political theme in both China and Taiwan this year. Each is using it to stake their opposing claims. The war over history is just as intense as the military drills.
Absolutely. Taiwan is actively pushing back against Beijing's historical monopoly on this narrative. A critical detail here is the focus on Taiwan Retrocession Day.
What is that?
It's a Memorial Day, October 25th, and it marks the anniversary of the end of Japanese imperial rule in Taiwan in 1945 and the island's return to Chinese administration, specifically the Republic of China government, which later retreated to Taiwan.
In Taiwan, recognizing the immense symbolic importance of these historical markers, actually passed a law in 2025 to formally recognize this date as a national holiday.
That's right. And by institutionalizing this date, Taiwan is performing a subtle but incredibly powerful act of historical self-determination. They are reinforcing the narrative that their current governance stems from the end of imperialism and the establishment of local self-rule following 1945.
Rather than being an unfinished, illegitimate project of the mainland CCP, as Beijing claims.
Exactly, they are saying. Our historical path diverged in 1949, and 1945 represents a foundation of our autonomy, not simply a handoff to Beijing.
And in contrast to Xi's emphasis on mainland historical triumph, Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te delivered a particularly punchy speech this year.
Yes, his speech was a powerful counter-narrative. Lai Ching-te specifically compared Taiwan's current situation to that of European democracies in the 1930s that faced the existential threat from Nazi Germany.
Wow, that's a dramatic and high-stakes analogy.
It is, and it's intended for both domestic and international audiences.
Why is that specific comparison, the 1930s democracies and Nazism, so potent and so inflammatory to Beijing?
Well, it's potent because it frames the modern threat from Beijing not as a fraternal dispute over reunification, which is how China wants to see it, but as an existential totalitarian threat requiring immediate, united democratic resistance.
He's invoking Munich.
He is explicitly attempting to invoke the memory of the Munich Agreement and the failure of appeasement. He is effectively issuing a direct, urgent warning to the international community. If you appease Beijing's territorial demands now, you will face an even greater, more aggressive threat later.
So he's transforming the conflict from a regional issue into a universal struggle between democracy and authoritarian expansionism.
And in doing so, he immediately boosts Taiwan's moral claim to international support.
That comparison is deeply provocative, but it provides our listener with the crucial multiple perspectives needed to understand that this conflict is being fought equally in the domain of historical narrative and legitimacy as it is in the Taiwan Strait.
Okay, so we've covered the external pressure, the military drills, the reunification vow, and that axis of upheaval alignment. Now we have to pivot to the other, equally critical side of Xi's strategic equation: internal consolidation and future resilience.
The domestic front.
Exactly. Because none of the external projection, the military parades, the space missions, none of it works if the economic and social foundation at home is weak.
That's the core insight. Beijing understands that its global influence is directly proportional to its domestic stability and its economic health.
And we saw that earlier on the day of his New Year's address. Xi spoke to top Chinese Communist Party officials and confirmed that China was on track to meet its 5% GDP growth target.
This wasn't just an economic report, it was a political assurance. So why is meeting that specific 5% target so politically necessary for internal legitimacy, especially given the significant domestic headwinds China faced in 2025?
5% is the crucial psychological and practical threshold for stability in modern China. I mean, growth rates were once in the double digits, but now 5% is the number needed to signal competence and reliability to the vast Chinese populace.
And to maintain employment.
And to maintain full employment, particularly among the youth entering the workforce. And the headwinds you mentioned are immense. The ongoing crisis in the property sector, epitomized by the struggles of massive developers like Evergrande, that has eroded household wealth and consumer confidence.
And youth unemployment has been a huge problem.
A persistent and strategically dangerous issue. So hitting 5% GDP growth isn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It's a required counter-narrative to all that domestic economic anxiety.
It allows Xi to frame the nation as robust, resilient, and competently managed, even while resource allocation toward the military and technology has been massive.
Precisely. Missing that target would signal profound weakness. It would invite domestic scrutiny and perhaps even political unrest that the party simply cannot afford, especially not while simultaneously threatening major international action.
So hitting 5% is the proof point that the system is working.
Which is essential to making the unstoppable rhetoric about Taiwan sound credible at home. The economic goal underpins the entire geopolitical strategy.
And this emphasis on stability, it links directly to the projection of future innovation, right? Because maintaining growth requires transitioning from old heavy industry to high-tech sectors.
Absolutely. The future of China's economy, and thus its legitimacy, rests on its ability to dominate emerging high-tech fields.
And beyond the raw GDP numbers, the speech used some very specific examples to praise China's progress in high-tech development this year. This is about projecting an image of future innovation.
It's about demonstrating global leadership, not just maintaining past economic bulk. And the examples chosen for the showcase are always illustrative of capability and strategic direction.
The source provided two excellent, high-impact concrete examples. First, kickboxing robots.
It's the perfect blend of technological advancement and visceral, visible capability.
Kickboxing robots. It sounds like something out of science fiction, but strategically, what does this demonstrate?
It demonstrates high-level engineering. It shows advanced AI, dynamic control systems, high-precision manufacturing. These are all capabilities with clear and immediate dual-use potential.
Meaning military and civilian.
Yes. While kickboxing itself is mostly for show, the underlying technology, the ability to maintain balance, to exert finely controlled force, and to respond dynamically to unpredictable stimuli, that is essential for advanced manufacturing automation, for difficult terrain operations, and inevitably for advanced military applications. It signals that China is not just copying technology, but mastering complex, cutting-edge systems.
And the second example is much further afield. Tianwen-2, a comet exploration mission that launched back in May.
This confirms space dominance and extremely ambitious long-term planning. The space program is an essential marker of global prestige and technological sophistication.
So what's the mission of Tianwen-2?
It's a mission to collect samples from a comet and an asteroid, and it confirms that China is not focused solely on immediate domestic concerns or regional geopolitical flashpoints. It shows that Beijing is investing heavily in complex, resource-intensive, cutting-edge science.
Yeah, that positions China as a leader in global exploration, competing directly with NASA and the European Space Agency.
And that's crucial for attracting top talent, demonstrating national prowess, and establishing dual-use technologies. Space technology almost always translates into improved satellite capabilities, which are essential for military command and control and intelligence gathering.
So when you pair kickboxing robots and comet missions, the message is pretty clear.
It is. China is innovative, agile, and looking decades ahead across the entire spectrum of human endeavor.
And finally, a soft power success. Xi also flagged the global success of Chinese cultural exports.
This demonstrates a strategic focus on projection beyond the traditional military and economic spheres. It's about proving that Chinese influence can travel through popular culture.
Why is that so important when you have such a powerful military and economy?
Because soft power is an incredibly valuable asset, particularly when you're trying to counter the negative international perceptions that stem from the axis of upheaval label and the military drills. The cultural dimension helps to normalize China in the global mind and wins over international consumers, particularly the youth.
And the two specific memorable details flagged were the video game Black Myth, Wukong, and the animated film Neza 2. These are serious global successes in highly competitive youth-focused industries.
They are powerful examples of modernized cultural projection. Black Myth. Wukong is based on the classic Chinese novel Journey to the West. It shows that China is competing successfully in the high-fidelity, high-revenue video game industry, an industry that's historically been dominated by Japan and the West.
So it successfully exports a core Chinese narrative globally in a compelling interactive medium.
It's all about capturing imagination and shaping narratives.
And Neza 2 does the same in cinema.
Exactly. Nizar 2 is an animated film based on mythical figures, and it demonstrates cinematic excellence and the ability to package traditional mythology and aesthetics in ways that resonate with international, often youthful, audiences.
So this focus on cultural exports, it indicates a strategy where military strength is underpinned by economic growth.
And both are sweetened by a strong, internationally appealing cultural identity. It suggests a holistic, 360-degree approach to global power projection. The strategic calculus is simple. A global audience that enjoys Chinese culture is an audience that's less inclined to support efforts to isolate or contain China.
So to summarize the internal message, we are technologically advanced, we are economically stable, hitting that 5% target, we're culturally rich, and, as we've established, militarily prepared. The strategy for 2026 is built on this foundation of comprehensive, resilient strength. That was an incredibly dense and comprehensive deep dive into the strategic signals embedded in China's end-of-year messaging. Let's try to synthesize these findings for you now, the listener, focusing on the points of highest tension, strategic impact.
Well, I think we identified three converging pillars that really define China's 2026 strategic summary. First, you have the core policy, that unstoppable reunification vow, which establishes an absolute historical destiny regarding
A
Taiwan. A
non-negotiable.
non-negotiable. Second, that vow is explicitly backed up by the dramatic military signaling, highlighted by the Justice Mission 2025 drills.
Which simulated that coercive blockade.
Right, and the use of the highest Air Force tally in over a year, directly tying that escalation to the record U.S. arms sales.
A very clear tit for tat.
Exactly. And third, China is consolidating its diplomatic position, showcasing the major multilateral summits, and that highly scrutinized alignment with the axis of upheaval nations, seeking to restructure global governance.
So what does this all mean strategically? This deep dive shows that China's strategy for the upcoming year is defined by two converging and almost contradictory tracks. You have maximum external pressure and projection via military force and aggressive diplomatic alignment.
Coupled with a relentless focus on internal innovation and economic stability, hitting that crucial 5% GDP mark despite all the headwinds.
And leveraging soft power through cultural exports. It's a dual strategy of overt strength and necessary stability.
And this entire architecture, it rests on historical legitimacy, as we saw in that rhetorical war over World War II. We noted that Taiwan, too, adopted Taiwan Retrocession Day as a national holiday in 2025,
Using the history of 1945 to establish its modern, distinct identity.
while Beijing uses the very same historical period to justify its claims to regional leadership and historic triumph.
The question for you to consider, then, builds on this intensifying rhetorical environment. If history is being claimed and really weaponized by both sides simultaneously, with China viewing itself as the historical victor underappreciated by the West, and Taiwan comparing itself to 1930s democracies facing Nazism. How much common ground or shared historical memory remains to de-escalate tensions and find a viable pathway forward without resorting to the kind of coercion we analyze today?
When both sides believe history is completely on their side, compromise becomes exponentially harder. And that is the fundamental tension that will define the trajectory of the coming year.
A deeply provocative and crucial thought indeed. Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive. We hope this analysis provides you with the strategic signals you need to navigate the complexities of 2026. We'll catch you next time.